Ever felt like your brain just ran on autopilot, making quick judgments or, leading you down a mental rabbit hole you later regretted? That feeling where you just know you're right, only to find out maybe you missed a crucial detail. We've all been there. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the incredible world of critical thinking. We're not just talking about what it is, but how our brains are actually wired to sometimes trip us up. And most importantly, the practical strategies we can all use to become more reflective, sharper thinkers in every part of our lives. This deep dive is built from a really comprehensive guide on critical thinking, research, reading, and writing. It's designed to sharpen your thinking, whether you're tackling complex academic ideas or just, making better decisions day to day.
Yeah, and our mission today is really all about understanding your personal inference machine, that amazing brain of yours. We want to uncover its natural pitfalls, the little traps it sets, and then equip you with the skills, the habits, and the attitudes that promote truly reflective, clear reasoning. Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to being well-informed and hopefully full of those aha moments where things just click.
Okay, let's unpack this then. It feels like the first step to thinking more critically is really understanding why we even make mistakes in the first place. And it sounds like it's not just about lacking intelligence, right? It's actually something more fundamental, maybe even ingenious, about how our minds naturally work.
That's absolutely right. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains have spent hundreds of thousands of years getting really, really good at being inference machines. An inference basically is your brain making a leap, drawing a conclusion from the evidence it has. And what's wild is how often this happens without you even realizing it. A lot of our basic perception is actually a type of inference. This ability to infer, quickly spotting a predator, figuring out if that berry is edible, was absolutely crucial for survival. But while these quick conclusions are fast, they aren't always accurate. Especially when we're aiming for something like scientific truth or philosophical clarity, those goals often require slower, more careful thought.
Okay, so when we talk about brain wiring and how it works, are we getting into the big philosophical swamp of mind versus brain here? Or is there a more practical way to look at it for today?
That's a good question. And yeah, philosophers definitely debate the exact link between the conscious mind and the physical brain, the whole mind-body problem. But for our purposes today, understanding how our physical brain processes information gives us incredibly practical tools. It helps us figure out how we ought to think more effectively. It gives us insights into our cognitive architecture without getting totally lost in, metaphysics.
Interesting, because I always sort of pictured my brain as just passively recording the world, like a camera,
Yeah.
Just capture reality, point and shoot. But it sounds like maybe not. This is where it gets really fascinating for me.
Oh, it's far from passive. Think of your brain more like an active artist, constantly projecting a version of the world to make sense of it for you. Like when you hear a faint, fuzzy sound, a rustle outside, and your brain instantly interprets it as maybe a specific word or sees a face in a cloud pattern. Your brain isn't just receiving data, it's actively projecting meaning, trying to complete the picture, even when the information is, incomplete or ambiguous. The neuroscientist David Eagleman uses this great analogy of a newspaper's front page. You don't get a detailed transcript of everything that happened in the world yesterday, right?
Right, just the headlines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You get a summary of the relevant consequential stuff, things important for your survival or goals. We perceive a sketch, not a fully rendered 3D photograph of reality.
Wow. So what does this all mean then? The old saying, seeing is believing, might actually be more like believing is seeing, or at least my brain's interpretation is seeing.
Precisely. And it's not just about perception. Our thinking itself isn't always as purely logical or rational as we sometimes like to imagine. Antonio Damasio's work was really groundbreaking here. He challenged that long-standing philosophical bias against emotion and reasoning. He argued that rational thought is actually tempered by our emotions. Our reasoning and intelligence function best when we actually care about something. Without feelings, believe it or not, we become less rational, not more. Our emotions are crucial for things like homeostasis, maintaining internal balance, like hunger telling you to eat, and even allostasis, anticipating future needs. Think about that fear response to a sudden noise. That's your brain anticipating potential danger. These processes, deeply tied to emotion, hugely influence our decision-making. And yeah, they can absolutely lead our thinking astray. Like if the fear of a bad outcome completely overrides a more rational calculation of the actual probabilities involved.
That's a really powerful point, how emotions are woven into our decisions. But then how do we tell the difference between, say, a helpful gut feeling and an emotion that's just, well, derailing our clear thinking. Because honestly, my brain often feels like it prefers being lazy. It makes sense evolutionarily, right? Think about walking through a grocery store, mostly autopilot, right? You're maybe thinking about dinner, not consciously placing each foot, but then try solving, I don't know, 24 times 14 in your head right now. That takes actual work.
It takes significant effort. And you hit on a really key concept there. Our brains rely heavily on mental shortcuts. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, called these heuristics. They're basically rules of thumb. They operate unconsciously, effortlessly, and usually very efficiently. We use them all the time. But the catch is, they're not always correct. Deliberate, rational thinking, like doing that multiplication, is effortful. It demands focus. Our brains are amazing at quickly reading facial expressions, for example. Super complex task, vital for social interaction, but that fast processing is also prone to errors and bias. A math problem. Difficult, slow, requires concentration. But once you solve it correctly, you're pretty certain about the answer. This is why, especially when you're a novice in a complex field like philosophy or maybe learning a new skill, it's wise to be skeptical of your immediate gut reactions. That easy, fast, unconscious thinking, while efficient, makes us vulnerable to prejudice, implicit bias, all sorts of errors, like quickly appraising the value of a used car without really knowing the market. You might just go with a feeling. A cognitive bias, then, is essentially a predictable pattern of this quick thinking going awry. It's like a perceptual illusion, but for our reasoning. These biases often stem from these very efficient, but sometimes misleading mental shortcuts. A really fundamental one is called the substitution heuristic. This is where your brain secretly answers an easier question instead of the hard one you were actually asked. For example, if someone asks, "How happy are you with your life overall?" That's a big, complex question. Your brain might quickly, unconsciously substitute it with, "How happy am I feeling right now?" and give an answer based on your current mood. It's effectively answering a different, simpler question.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So our brains come preloaded with these amazing shortcuts, but they have definite downsides, these biases. Understanding that feels like the first huge step. But then how do we actively, consciously guard against these built-in errors? How do we think more clearly when our brains are so good at, well, fooling us sometimes?
This is exactly where critical reflection and metacognition come into play. Metacognition literally means thinking about thinking. It's about cultivating self-awareness, consciously paying attention to your own thought processes, and making a deliberate effort to evaluate them. It can feel unnatural, even a bit tiring at first, because it goes against that automatic, easy thinking.
Right, it's work.
It is work, but it consistently leads to much more accurate judgments and better decisions in the long run. Even simple practices help, like consciously checking your reasoning, planning your approach to a problem, or even just pausing to ask yourself, why do I believe this? Or what assumptions am I making? Maybe we can talk through a few common cognitive biases, just so you can start spotting them in yourself and others.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first up, a big one. Confirmation bias. This is our brain's tendency to actively search for, interpret, favor, and then recall information that confirms what we already believe. It's not just about seeking out agreeable information. It's also about how readily our brain accepts confirming evidence and how critically it examines disconfirming evidence. It sort of turns our beliefs into self-fulfilling prophecies.
Like only reading news sites you already agree with.
Or think about social media algorithms. They're practically designed to feed you more of what you already like and agree with. They essentially turbocharge confirmation bias, which can contribute to polarization. Peter Wasson did a classic experiment with number sequences like 2, 4, 8. People quickly formed a hypothesis, say numbers increasing by 2. But then they mostly tested sequences that confirmed their rule, like 10, 12, 14. They rarely tried sequences that could falsify their hypothesis, like 2, 4, 9. They failed to actively look for evidence that might prove them wrong.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I can definitely see myself doing that, especially maybe in an argument when I really want to prove my point. It's like our brains just crave being right.
They really do. And speaking of how first impressions can stick, another sneaky one is anchoring bias. This is our tendency to rely way too heavily on the very first piece of information offered the anchor when making decisions or estimates, even if that initial piece of information is totally arbitrary. Tversky and Kahneman did this great experiment asking people to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN. Before they guessed, a wheel of fortune was spun, landing on a random number, say 10 or 65. People who saw the number 10 guessed a much lower percentage on average than those who saw 65. The random number anchored their subsequent estimate, even though they knew it was completely random.
Wow. So that first offer in a negotiation really does set the stage, huh?
Absolutely. Whether it's fair or not, it heavily influences everything that follows. Then there's the availability heuristic. This is where we judge the likelihood of something based on how easily examples come to mind. So we might overestimate the probability of dying in, say, a plane crash or from terrorism, because those events are very vivid and get lots of media coverage. They're readily available in our memory, even though statistically you're far more likely to die from something more mundane like heart disease or a car accident. Those just don't stick in the mind the same way. The ease of recall makes us think the event is more common or probable than it actually is.
Yeah, I feel like that one gets amplified like crazy by the 24/7 news cycle. We see dramatic headlines constantly. It's really hard not to think the world is more dangerous than the statistics might suggest.
It truly is. Our brains are wired to notice novel, dramatic information, and that's often what media delivers. Let's touch on a couple more quickly because they're quite common. How about biases that make us cling to past investments, like the sunk cost fallacy? This is when we attach greater value to something simply because we've already poured resources into it, time, money, effort, emotional energy, even when it's objectively become a liability or a bad deal. Think about sticking with a failing business project way too long just because you've already invested so much. Or maybe
Or that old printer.
Yeah.
Keep buying ink, trying to fix it, spending more than a new one would cost.
That printer example is perfect. It feels like admitting defeat to just give up on it. And while this tendency might have had some evolutionary purpose, fostering loyalty, encouraging follow-through on long projects in modern life, it's crucial to step back and ask, does continued investment actually make sense regardless of what I've already spent? And related to seeing patterns, there's the gambler's fallacy. This is the mistaken belief that future random events are influenced by past random events, like expecting a coin to land on tails just because it's landed on heads 5 times in a row.
Right, feeling like tails is due.
Each coin flip is independent. The coin has no memory. But our minds desperately want to find a pattern or balance things out. These are just a handful. Our brains are full of these shortcuts.
Okay, so we know our brains are riddled with these potential mental traps. So how can you, the listener, actively fight against these ingrained tendencies and really practice critical reflection in your day-to-day life?
Well, like we said, there aren't really quick fixes or magic bullets, but cultivating certain good habits of mind can make a huge difference in combating these natural biases over time. One really key habit is to constantly strive for objectivity. This means actively trying to abstract away from your own specific personal circumstances and viewpoint to arrive at more general, objective ways of looking at things, like trying to imagine what political justice might look like in principle, not just how your own country's system happens to work. However, and this is crucial, objectivity also means recognizing when specific lived experiences, especially perhaps from marginalized groups, are actually indispensable for getting a fuller, more comprehensive, and more inclusive picture. It's not about ignoring experience, but balancing it with broader principles.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a balance. So if our default is often to defend our own viewpoint, how do we genuinely open ourselves up to understanding an opposing argument? Because I know it's super easy to just find the weakest point and attack that.
That's a very common trap, often called straw manning, misrepresenting an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. The much more productive and, frankly, intellectually honest approach is called steel manning. Steel manning means you try to formulate the strongest possible version of an argument you disagree with. You give it the best possible interpretation. Only by grappling with the strongest form of the opposing view can you truly test your own position. It makes you a much better thinker, a better philosopher, really. Another really powerful tool in the critical thinking toolkit is actively looking for counterexamples. This means finding a specific instance or scenario that meets all the conditions, the premises, of a general claim, but where the conclusion of that claim turns out to be false. For example, if someone claims all knowledge comes directly from personal experience, you could offer the counterexample. I know my mother was born, but I have no direct personal experience of that event. That single instance challenges the universal claim, and we talked about emotions earlier. While they're vital, strong emotional reactions, anger, fear, even intense excitement can definitely cloud judgment. So another habit is to maintain skepticism of strong emotions when you're trying to reason clearly. Use that metacognition we talked about. Pause and reflect. Why am I feeling this strongly? Is this emotion helping me see clearly, or is it distorting my view? Sometimes just taking a step back, taking a break, or trying to imagine how a neutral observer might see the situation can really help regain perspective. And maybe underpinning all of this is the need to adopt epistemic humility. That sounds fancy, but it just means recognizing the limits of your own knowledge, recognizing how fragile much of what we think we know actually is. Our perspective is always shaped by our experiences, our biases, our culture. And even our best science only explains a tiny fraction of the universe. It means constantly asking yourself, do I really know what I think I know? How sure am I? Could I be wrong? Think about a common belief like getting cold or wet gives you a cold. Lots of people believe it.
Yeah, my grandmother always said that.
Right. But colds are caused by viruses. The temperature itself isn't the direct cause. Epistemic humility means questioning even those widely accepted beliefs and checking the evidence.
And this relates to another famous effect, doesn't it? About knowing what you don't know.
Exactly. The Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a well-documented cognitive bias where people with low competence or expertise in a particular area tend to significantly overestimate their ability, while conversely, highly competent experts often slightly underestimate their own abilities because they're more aware of the complexities and nuances. So the key takeaway for you, especially when you're learning something new, maybe diving into philosophy or any complex field, is to be extremely wary of feeling overly confident too early. That strong feeling of, I've got this, when you're still a novice, might actually be a sign you don't fully grasp the complexities yet. True expertise usually comes with a healthy dose of humility about how much more there is to learn.
These habits of mind objectivity, steel-manning, humility, they're so fundamental. And they don't just apply to abstract thinking, right? They must directly impact how we actually engage with information in the real world, what we choose to read, how we do research, and even how we communicate our own ideas.
Absolutely. They're incredibly practical. Take online research, for instance. It's a minefield these days. Search engines don't rank results primarily by accuracy or trustworthiness. They rank by things like paid ads, popularity, how many other sites link to it. And traditional ways of evaluating sources, like checking how current it is, often fail because misinformation is deliberately designed to look current and authoritative. This is why a method like SIFT, which was developed specifically for student fact-checkers navigating the online world, is so incredibly useful. Its core insight is simple but powerful. Always verify laterally. Don't just evaluate the source itself. See what other trusted sources say about it. SIFT has 4 basic moves. First, stop. Just pause. Slow down that fast, intuitive thinking. Engage critical reflection. Before you share or deeply engage, do some digging and then come back to the original source to reevaluate it. Second, investigate the source. Don't just rely on the website's About Us page, they wrote that themselves. Instead, read laterally, open new tabs, search for the name of the website, the author, the organization. What do other reputable sources, like fact-checking sites, established news organizations, or experts say about them? Are they generally considered reliable? Third, find better coverage. Especially for controversial or surprising claims, try to find other trusted sources reporting on the same topic. Do their accounts generally agree? If you can only find the claim on one dubious-looking site, be very skeptical. And fourth, trace claims, quotes, and media back to the original context. Follow the links or citations if they're provided. If a quote is mentioned, search for the exact phrase online to find where it originally appeared. Was it taken out of context? Is the image or video authentic? If it's hard to trace a claim back to a solid origin, that's a major red flag. The key is always stepping outside the source to get your bearings.
The source material we used had some great, really vivid examples of why the SIFT method is so needed, like debunking claims about, I think, Mexico paying for a border wall, or this wild story about a smart toilet, or even drilling at Stonehenge. It really shows you can't just passively accept what pops up first in your search result.
And this critical engagement applies just as much when you're reading complex texts like philosophical arguments or dense academic papers. It's a very different process than reading a novel for the plot. Your goal isn't just to absorb information, it's to actively engage with the ideas, wrestle with the arguments, and hopefully reach a new, deeper understanding. Preparation matters. Find a distraction-free space. And use annotation tools, a pencil for marginal notes, maybe digital comments, to actively track the argument's structure, key claims, and your own questions. Please, don't just passively highlight huge chunks of text.
Guilty. I used to do that all the time.
We all did. But active notes are much better. 2 key principles for reading philosophy are vital. First, the principle of charity. Always try to interpret the author's statements in the most rational, intelligent, and palatable way possible. Assume they are smart people trying to make a good argument, even if you initially disagree. Second, learn to work with the dialectic. Philosophical texts often present multiple viewpoints, arguments, and counterarguments. Pay close attention to tracking these different threads and understand that not every argument presented necessarily represents the author's final, settled position. They might be exploring an idea or responding to an objection. We often recommend a 3-step method for tackling challenging reads. First, pre-read. Look at the title, author, publication details, maybe the table of contents or bibliography. Get the context. Who's this author? What's their likely perspective? Where does this piece fit in a larger conversation? Second, do a first read. Go through it relatively quickly. The goal here is just to get the gist. What are the main claims? What's the overall structure of the argument? What evidence is offered? Flag terms you don't know or passages that seem particularly important or confusing for follow-up. And finally, the close read. This is where you slow right down. Read deliberately. Think alongside the author, look up those unfamiliar terms, ask yourself critical questions constantly. How does this claim follow from the previous one? Is this evidence actually adequate? What assumptions are being made here? Articulate your own questions and potential objections as you go. You're preparing yourself to actually do philosophy with the text, not just consume it.
This all logically leads into crafting your own persuasive arguments, doesn't it? Whether that's for a philosophy paper, a work presentation, or even just making a strong case for something with friends or family. What are the essential building blocks there?
First and foremost, a strong argument needs a clear, focused, and defensible claim or thesis statement. You want something narrow and modest enough that you can actually support it well, going beyond just summarizing or describing. Good theses often involve things like comparing two different positions, identifying a specific weakness in an existing argument, applying a concept to a new situation, perhaps strengthening an argument you agree with, or exploring the logical implications of an idea. Second, you need to collect evidence and build your case meticulously, almost like a detective. Gather support from your readings, use philosophical tools like counterexamples or thought experiments, maybe even draw on carefully examined intuitions, but always cautiously. Importantly, be willing to modify or even abandon your initial claim if the evidence you find doesn't actually support it. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, especially in academic writing like philosophy, you must consider counterarguments. Addressing potential objections head-on shows you've thought deeply about your position, anticipated weaknesses, and it ultimately strengthens your own case by demonstrating why your view is preferable despite those challenges. Always, always accurately represent source material. Apply that principle of charity we mentioned. Avoid strawmanning opponents or taking quotes out of context just to make your point seem stronger. It undermines your credibility. And finally, organize your argument logically. A standard structure usually works best. An introduction that provides context and clearly states your thesis. Then the body paragraphs, where you build your logical and compelling case step by step, presenting evidence, interpreting it, addressing counter-arguments, and offering replies. And lastly, a conclusion that briefly summarizes your main points and reinforces your thesis, but avoids introducing brand new information.
Wow, what a deep dive indeed. We've really covered a lot of ground here, from the deep evolutionary wiring of our brains and how those mental shortcuts can sometimes lead us astray, all the way to really practical strategies for sifting through information online and building solid, persuasive arguments of our own. It's actually kind of humbling, isn't it, to realize just how much our brains are actively shaping our reality, often without us even being fully aware of it.
It really is. And the key takeaway, I hope, is that critical thinking isn't just some abstract term for academics. It's a vital set of skills, habits, and yes, attitudes that empower you every single day. By understanding how your brain naturally makes inferences, by recognizing its built-in shortcuts and biases, and by actively practicing things like metacognition and that crucial epistemic humility, you gain a massive advantage. An advantage in navigating the overwhelming flood of information we all face, and ultimately in making better, more reasoned decisions. This deep dive, hopefully, has given you some tools to not just think, but to think better.